Hello, this is Morel Bernard with Storytelling, a new story, The Talking Tree, The Singing Bird, and The Golden Water. There was an emperor of Persia named Khosrusha, who, when he first came to his crown in order to obtain a knowledge of affairs, took great pleasure in night excursions, attended by a trusty minister. He often walked in disguise through the city and met with many adventurers. One of the most remarkable of which happened to him upon his first ramble, which was not long after his accession to the throne of his father. After the ceremonies of his father's funeral rites and his own inauguration were over, the new sultan, as well from inclination as from duty, went out one evening, attended by his grand vizier, disguised like himself, to observe what was transacting in the city. As he was passing through a street in that part of town, inhabited only by the meaner sort, he heard some people talking very loud, and going close to the house whence the noise proceeded, and looking through a crack in the door, perceived a light, and three sisters sitting on a sofa, conversing together after supper. By what the eldest said, he presently understood the subject of their conversation was wishes. For she said, "Since we are talking about wishes, mine shall be to have the sultan's baker for my husband, for then I shall eat my fill of that bread, which by way of excellence is called the sultan's. Let us see if your tastes are as good as mine." "For my part," replied the second sister, "I wish I was wife to the sultan's chief cook, for then I should eat of the most excellent dishes, and as I am persuaded that the sultan's bread is common in the palace, I should not want any of that. Therefore, you see," addressing herself to her elder sister, "that I have a better taste than you." The youngest sister, who was very beautiful, and had more charms and wit than the other two elder, spoke in her turn. "For my part, sisters," said she, "I shall not limit my desires to such trifles, but take a higher flight. And since we are upon wishing, I wish to be the emperor's Queen Consort. I would make him father of a prince, whose hair should be gold on one side of his head and silver on the other. When he cried, the tears from his eyes should be pearls, and when he smiled, his vermilion lips should look like a rosebud fresh blown." The three sisters' wishes, particularly that of the youngest, seemed so singular to the sultan that he resolved to gratify them in their desires, but without communicating his design to his grand vizier. He charged him only to take notice of the house and bring the three sisters before him the following day. The grand vizier, in executing the emperor's orders, would but just give the sisters time to dress themselves, to appear before his majesty, without telling them the reason. He brought them to the palace and presented them to the emperor, who said to them, Do you remember the wishes you expressed last night when you were all in so pleasant a mood? Speak the truth. I must know what they were." At these unexpected words of the emperor, the three sisters were much confounded. They cast down their eyes and blushed, and the colour which rose in the cheeks of the youngest quite captivated the emperor's heart. Modesty and fear, lest they might have offended by their conversation, kept them silent. The emperor, perceiving their confusion, said to encourage them, "Fear not. I did not send for you to distress you, and since I see that without my intending it, this is the effect of a question I asked. As I know the wish of each, I will relieve you from your fears. You," added he, "who wish to be my wife, shall have your desire this day. And you," continued he, addressing himself to the two elder sisters, "shall also be married to my chief baker and cook." As soon as the sultan had declared his pleasure, the younger sister, setting her elders an example, threw herself at the emperor's feet to express her gratitude. "Sir," said she, "my wish, since it is come to your majesty's knowledge, was expressed only in the way of conversation and amusement. I am unworthy of the honour you do me, and supplicate your pardon for my presumption." The other two sisters would have excused themselves also, but the emperor interrupted them, said, "No, no, it shall be as I have declared. The wishes of all shall be fulfilled." The nuptials were all celebrated that day, as the emperor had resolved, but in a different manner. The youngest sisters were solemnized with all the rejoicings usual at the marriages of the emperors of Persia, and those of the other two sisters according to the quality and distinction of their husbands, the one as the sultan's chief baker, and the other as head cook. The two elder felt strongly the disproportion of their marriages to that of their younger sister. This consideration made them far from being content, though they were arrived at the utmost height of their late wishes, and much beyond their hopes. They gave themselves up to an excess of jealousy, which not only disturbed their joy, but was the cause of great trouble and affliction to the Queen Consort, their younger sister. They had not an opportunity to communicate their thoughts to each other on the preference the emperor had given her, but were altogether employed in preparing themselves for the celebration of their marriages. Some days afterward, when they had an opportunity of seeing each other at the public baths, the eldest said to the other, "Well, what say you to our sister's great fortune? Is not she a fine person to be a queen?" "I must own," said the other sister, "I cannot conceive what charms the emperor could discover to be so bewitched by her. Was it a reason sufficient for him not to cast his eyes on you because she was somewhat younger? You were as worthy of his throne, and in justice he ought to have preferred you." "Sister," said the elder, "I should not have regretted if his majesty had but pitched upon you, but that he should choose that little simpleton really grieves me. But I will revenge myself, and you, I think, are as much concerned as I. Therefore, I propose that we should contrive measures and act in concert. Communicate to me what you think the likeliest way to mortify her, while I, on my side, will inform you what my desire of revenge shall suggest to me. After this wicked agreement, the two sisters saw each other frequently and consulted how they might disturb and interrupt the happiness of the queen. They proposed a great many ways, but in deliberating about the manner of executing them, found so many difficulties that they durst not attempt them. In the meantime, with a detestable dissimulation, they often went together to make her visits, and every time showed her all the marks of affection they could devise, to persuade her how overjoyed they were to have a sister raised to so high a fortune. The queen, on her part, constantly received them with all the demonstrations of esteem they could expect from so near a relative. Some time after her marriage, the expected birth of an heir gave great joy to the queen and emperor, which was communicated to all the court and spread throughout the empire. Upon this news, the two sisters came to pay their compliments and preferred their services, desiring her, if not provided with nurses, to accept of them. The queen said to them most obligingly, "Sisters, I should desire nothing more if it were in my power to make the choice. I am, however, obliged to you for your goodwill, but must submit to what the emperor shall order on this occasion. Let your husbands employ their friends to make interest and get some courtier to ask this favour of His Majesty. And if he speaks to me about it, be assured that I shall not only express the pleasure he does me, but thank him for making choice of you." The two husbands applied themselves to some courtiers, their patrons, and begged of them to use their interests to procure their wives the honour they aspired to. Those patrons exerted themselves so much in their behalf that the emperor promised them to consider of the matter, and was as good as his word. For in conversation with the queen, he told her that he thought her sisters were the most proper persons to be about her, but would not name them before he had asked her consent. The queen, sensible of the deference the emperor so obligingly paid her, said to him, "Sir, I was prepared to do as your majesty might please to command. But since you have been so kind as to think of my sisters, I thank you for the regard you have shown them for my sake, and therefore I shall not dissemble that I'd rather have them than strangers." The emperor therefore named the queen's two sisters to be her attendants, and from that time they went frequently to the palace, overjoyed at the opportunity they would have of executing the detestable wickedness they had meditated against the queen. Shortly after, a young prince, as bright as the day, was born to the queen. But neither his innocence nor beauty could move the cruel hearts of the merciless sisters. They wrapped him up carelessly in his clothes and put him into a basket, which they abandoned to the stream of a small canal that ran under the Queen's apartment, and declared that she, the Queen, had given birth to a puppy. This dreadful intelligence was announced to the Emperor, who became so angry at the circumstance that he was likely to have occasioned the Queen's death if his Grand Vizier had not represented to him that he could not, without justice, make her answerable for the misfortune. In the meantime, the basket in which the little prince was exposed was carried by the stream beyond a wall which bounded the prospect of the Queen's apartment, and from thence floated with the current down the gardens. By chance, the intendant of the Emperor's gardens, one of the principal officers of the kingdom, was walking in the garden by the side of this canal, and perceiving a basket floating, called to a gardener who was not far off to bring it to shore, that he might see what it contained. The gardener, with a rake which he had in his hand, drew the basket to the side of the canal, took it up, and gave it to him. The intendant of the gardens was extremely surprised to see in the basket a child, which, though he knew it could be but just born, had very fine features. This officer had been married several years, but though he had always been desirous of having children, heaven had never blessed him with any. This accident interrupted his walk. He made the gardener follow him with the child, and when he came to his own house, which was situated at the entrance to the gardens of the palace, he went into his wife's apartment. "Wife," said he, "as we have no children of our own, God has sent us one. I recommend him to you. Provide him with a nurse, and take as much care of him as if he were our own son, for from this moment I acknowledge him as such." The intendant's wife received the child with great joy and took particular pleasure in the care of him. The intendant himself would not inquire too narrowly whence the infant came. He saw plainly it came not far off from the Queen's apartment, but it was not his business to examine too closely into what had passed, nor to create disturbances in a place where peace was so necessary. The following year, another prince was born, on whom the unnatural sisters had no more compassion than on his brother, but exposed him likewise in a basket, and set him adrift in the canal, pretending this time that the sultana had given birth to a cat. It was happy also for this child that the intendant of the gardens was walking by the canal side, for he had had it carried to his wife, and charged her to take as much care of it as of the former, which was as agreeable to her inclination as it was to his own. The Emperor of Persia was more enraged this time against the Queen than before, and she had felt the effects of his anger if the Grand Vizier's remonstrances had not prevailed. The third year, the Queen gave birth to a princess, which innocent babe underwent the same fate as her brothers. For the two sisters, being determined not to desist from their detestable schemes till they had seen the Queen cast off and humbled, claimed that a log of wood had been born, and exposed this infant also on the canal. But the princess, as well as her brothers, was preserved from death by the compassion and charity of the intendant of the gardens. Khosrusha could no longer contain himself when he was informed of the new misfortune. He pronounced sentence of death upon the wretched queen and ordered the Grand Vizier to see it executed. The Grand Vizier and the courtiers who were present cast themselves at the emperor's feet to beg of him to revoke the sentence. "Your Majesty, I hope will give me leave," said the Grand Vizier, "to represent to you that the laws which condemn persons to death were made to punish crimes. The 3 extraordinary misfortunes of the Queen are not crimes, for in what can she be said to have contributed towards them? Your Majesty may abstain from seeing her, but let her live. The affliction in which she will spend the rest of her life after the loss of your favour will be a punishment sufficiently distressing." The Emperor of Persia considered with himself, and reflecting that it was unjust to condemn the Queen to death for what had happened, said, "Let her live then. I will spare her life, but it shall be on this condition, that she shall desire to die more than once every day. Let a wooden shed be built for her at the gate of the principal mosque, with iron bars to the windows, and let her be put into it in the coarsest habit. And every Mussulman that shall go into the mosque to prayers shall heap scorn upon her. If any one fail, I will have him exposed to the same punishment, and that I may be punctually obeyed. I charge you, Vizier, to appoint persons to see this done." The Emperor pronounced his sentence in such a tone that the Grand Vizier durst not further remonstrate, and it was executed to the great satisfaction of the 2 envious sisters. A shed was built, and the Queen, truly worthy of compassion, was put into it and exposed ignominiously to the contempt of the people, which usage she bore with a patient resignation that excited the compassion of those who were discriminating and judged of things better than the vulgar. The 2 princes and princess were in the meantime nursed and brought up by the intendant of the gardens and his wife with the tenderness of a father and mother. And as they advanced in age, they all showed marks of superior dignity, which discovered itself every day by a certain air which could only belong to exalted birth. All this increased the affections of the intendant and his wife, who called the eldest prince Bahman, and the second Pervis, both of them names of the most ancient emperors of Persia, and the princess Perizade, which name also had been borne by several queens and princesses of the kingdom. Join me for the next video. I'll stop there. Join me for the next video. Look out for the next video. We'll see what happened to the story. Join me for the next video. Me Morale. Bye-bye.